For decades, one of the most appealing promises of education technology has been personalization. The idea is simple: every student learns differently. Some move quickly through concepts, others need more time to explore ideas and practice new skills. So, why should every student follow exactly the same path through a course? Modern learning platforms can now adapt content dynamically for students. They can recommend different exercises, adjust difficulty levels, and guide learners through an individualized pathway. And at first glance, this sounds like the ideal learning environment. Each student receives exactly what they need, exactly when they need it. But education has always been more than an individual journey. Students don't just learn from content, they learn from each other, from shared discussions, from encountering the same ideas at the same moment and interpreting them together. So the real question may not be whether personalization improves learning. It most certainly can. The question is something more subtle. What happens to shared intellectual experience when every learner follows a different path? Welcome back to the EdTech Curio Cabinet. Hello again, I'm Christina, the Curio Steward. And in the EdTech Curio Cabinet, we explore curiosities in education technology using four lenses. First, the artifact, the technology or trend we're examining. Second, the pattern, where we've seen something similar before. Third, the paradox, the unexpected insight hiding inside the story. And finally, the signal, a small clue about where learning might be headed next. Today's Curio explores one of the most widely celebrated ideas in modern education technology: personalized learning. The ability for technology to adapt content, pace, and instruction to the needs of each individual learner. On the surface, personalization seems like an obvious improvement. But like many innovations, particularly in education, the deeper story becomes more interesting when we ask how these technologies interact with the social nature of learning. Adaptive learning platforms are designed to respond to individual student performance in real time. They analyze how a student answers questions, they identify patterns and errors, and adjust instructional pathways dynamically. A student struggling with a concept might receive additional explanations, targeted practice questions, and scaffolded problems. Now, a student that's progressing quickly might skip ahead, they'll encounter more complex material, and possibly explore advanced applications. These systems build on decades of research in intelligent tutoring systems, including early work by Beverly Park Woolf, whose research helped define how instructional systems could model student understanding and adapt accordingly. In many ways, these systems aim to approximate one of the most effective forms of learning we know: individualized instruction. This connects the work of Benjamin Bloom, who showed that one-on-one tutoring could significantly improve student outcomes, a phenomenon we touched on in an earlier talk this season, the Two Sigma problem. Adaptive systems attempt to scale that idea. And today, they are increasingly common, particularly in mathematics and STEM disciplines, where structured problem solving makes adaptation easier to design and implement. So technologically, this is impressive. But learning has always involved more than individual progression through content. Educational research has long emphasized that learning is not purely an individual process. It is also deeply social. In our episode on feedback, we briefly touched on psychologist Len Vygotsky's argument that learning often occurs through interaction with others, particularly within what he called the zone of proximal development, a space where a learner can succeed with guidance. Students build understanding not only through the individual effort, but through discussion, explanation, collaboration, shared problem solving, and more recent research reinforces this idea. Studies on peer instruction show that students often learn more effectively when they explain concepts to one another, because explaining requires them to organize and articulate their thinking. This connects directly with something we explored in season 1. In the lecture that refuses to die, we observed that lectures persist partly because they create a shared intellectual experience. Everyone encounters the same idea at the same time. And in active learning, we saw that engagement, especially collaborative engagement, deepens understanding. These patterns suggest something very important. Learning is both individual, where we do the processing, practice, and reflection, and collective, We have discussion, comparison, shared meaning. And effective learning environments typically balance both. Now, here's the paradox. Personalization improves efficiency. Students progress at their own pace. Misconceptions are identified and addressed quickly. Learning pathways adapt to the individual needs of the student. Now, from a system perspective, this looks ideal. But learning isn't only about efficiency. It's about shared discovery. When students encounter the same ideas, they can compare interpretations with one another, they can challenge one another's thinking, and build understanding together. But in a highly personalized environment, students may have different examples, different problems, and different sequences of ideas, which makes a shared discussion very difficult. The classroom becomes less of an intellectual space and more of a set of parallel individual experiences. So the paradox is this: the more precisely we tailor learning to individuals, the harder it may become to create a shared meaning. And shared meaning is often where deeper understanding develops. The signal emerging from adaptive learning research is not that personalization is flawed. It is that it is incomplete on its own. The most promising direction is not full personalization, but intentional combination. Hybrid learning environments that integrate individual practice, supported by adaptive systems, collaborative discussion and peer interactions, and instructor-led synthesis and framing. In this model, adaptive systems help students build foundational understanding, and then the classroom interactions help students test those ideas, articulate reasoning, and encounter alternative perspectives. Instructors then help connect individual learning to a coherent shared experience. This aligns with a broader pattern we've seen across the Curio cabinet. Technology is most powerful when it supports, rather than replaces, core learning processes. And those processes include individual cognition and social interaction. In this sense, adaptive learning systems are not the endpoint. They are one component of a larger ecosystem, one that must still account for the fundamentally social nature of learning. Adaptive learning systems represent an important advancement. They allow instruction to respond to individual needs in ways that were previously difficult to achieve at scale. But they also remind us of something essential. Learning is not just about moving efficiently through content. It is about developing understanding. And understanding often emerges through interaction between ideas, between people, between different perspectives. This challenge is not just choosing between personalization and shared learning. It is designing environments where both can coexist. Education technology evolves quickly, but the patterns of learning change slowly. And sometimes the most important insights come not from what technology makes possible, but from what it reveals about how people learn. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio Cabinet.